Hey everybody, welcome back to Ready Steady Play. It's time for Saban's Power Rangers, Heroes of the Grid. Now those of you who are children of the 90s will remember the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers TV show, and this is the board game. Designed by Jonathan Ying of Bargain Quest fame. This was a Kickstarter that ran some time ago, and it's just been fulfilled recently, but they will be doing a second run in September 2019. So if it's later than that, I'm afraid you might have missed it. But we've got the core set here from the first run. It is available at retail as well, I think, at least in some places. But what I'm going to do in this video is take you through the rules and setup to get you started and stuck into this core set. But this has got the original Rangers, the original 5 Rangers from the TV show, which is, of course, red, blue, yellow, pink, and black. It's got Rita Repulsa, it's got Pudgy Pig, it's got Nasty Knight, it's got the Claw Lady, whose name I forgot, and you'll be running around Angel Grove trying to defeat the Putty Patrollers and Super Putty Patrollers. The game takes roughly an hour to play, depending on your player count and how difficult you make it. The game consists of a number of mini bosses and then a final boss which the Power Rangers have to defeat. The game's for 2 to 5 players and it's fully cooperative. So if you guys are familiar with my videos, this is going to be broken down into 3 sections. We'll go through all the components in the box, then we'll look at setting up the game, and then we'll look at the gameplay. All of the sections are listed below if you want to find something specific, or if you just want to have an idea about the layout of the video. So without further ado, let's get this box opened up and take a look at what's inside. So of course we've got a rulebook, standard. We've got the command center for the board, and this is double-sided with an advanced side that I'll talk about at the end of this video. We've got the districts, which are double-sided as well, with their basic side and advanced side. More on that later. You should have 4 district tiles. You've got a power board here with a level tracker and some Zords. We've got a tray here of Putty Patrollers. We've got 12 Super Putty Patrollers and 12 regular Putty Patrollers. We've got a tray here with all the Rangers in it. And of course the monsters and the boss, Rita Repulsa. We've also got here the Zords, 1 for each Ranger. Plus of course the Megazord. And then we've got the Power Ranger cards themselves. We've got these damage tokens, we've got energy tokens, a lead ranger marker, action markers, 1 Megazord token, we've got 4 panic tokens, and a level tracker. You should also have 6 of these combat dice. Now we've got these Power Ranger cards here, 10 for each ranger, so a total of 50 cards. And you can tell because they're color coded. Here we've got 5 Rangers, each with their Ranger deck of 10 cards. There should be 1 deck of cards like this for each monster, and of course there are 4 monsters in the game, and you'll also have 1 deck of cards for the boss, Rita Repulsa. So here you can see we've got 1 deck of cards for each of the 4 monsters and the boss in the game. Finally, we've also got this deck of locations and enemy spawns for the Putty Patrollers and Super Putty Patrollers. We've got a deck of combat cards for the Super Putty Patrollers and a deck of combat cards for the regular Putty Patrollers. And now that we've managed to get everything out of the box, let's get the game set up. We'll be setting up a 5-player game in this video, but what I'll do is I will explain at the end of this setup section the differences between a 5, 4, and 3-player game. The 2-player game is just a little more complex, so I'll explain that at the end of the video in a different section. So we've got all our miniatures out, we've got them set up over on the side there. So the first thing we can do is take the command center and put it in the middle of the table. You'll note that there is an advanced command center side, which I'll explain at the end of the video if you want to have a look at how that works. There's also these areas, and they're placed randomly around the command center. And note that for the purposes of this video, I'm putting them on their simple side, but they have an advanced side, which I'll explain in a separate section at the end of this video. So now that we've set up the board, the next thing we can do is put out the power board here, somewhere where everyone can grab it. We'll take this power level tracker here and put it on 0. And we'll grab the Zord deck and set it up. So in the core set, you're always going to use 6 cards with Megazord included. So we've got the 5 Zords, so we're just going to take those 5 and give them a shuffle so they're in a random order. And then we'll take the Megazord card and put it on the bottom. Now that this is complete, we can put it here in the middle of the power board. We'll also take the Megazord token and put it somewhere close by. Now each player is going to collect the following things for their Power Ranger. 1 Power Ranger Mini, 1 deck of 10 Power Ranger cards, 1 Power Ranger character card, 2 green action tokens, 1 power token. Once each Ranger has collected their components, they'll take their Ranger deck here, and they'll give it a good shuffle, and then they'll draw up to 5 cards. Now remember, you've only got 10 cards in your Power Ranger deck, and the cards are kind of like the Power Ranger's life force. If the Ranger ever runs out of cards, or goes to draw cards and there are none left in the deck, then that Ranger is defeated and returns to the command center. The team will lose a life. If there's no lives left in the command center, then the Rangers lose. So this is something to think about whenever you draw cards. Pretty much every time you draw cards in Power Rangers, you can draw up to 5. Certain cards and abilities let Power Rangers go over the hand size of 5, but whenever you're drawing cards during setup or at the beginning of a combat, you may always draw until you have 5 in your hand. Each Ranger has a unique ability on their player board. These are thematic and linked to the Ranger's role in the team. I won't go through all the abilities, but they're pretty self-explanatory, and they tell you when they can be triggered and what they do. I'm going to put away the other 3 Rangers for now, just leaving these 2 out as an example for setup. But this is a setup for a 5-player game. What we're going to do now is create our monster deployment deck. And this is going to be the deck of monsters that we have to get through in order to fight and defeat Rita Repulsa. Of course, you might have more bosses if you've got additional content from the Kickstarter. So, we start by shuffling our monster deployment deck here, which has also got the 4 locations on the back of it. And we divide it up into 4 5-card piles. Now that we've done that, we'll take our boss card here, which is Rita Repulsa, because we only have 1 boss in the core set, and we'll put it down here. Then we're going to take our remaining monster cards, whichever ones we might face in this particular game that we're setting up. In this case, it's these 4 here. We're going to give this deck of monster cards a shuffle, so we don't know the order. And then put a monster down here, and a monster down here. Then we'll take the boss card and shuffle it into here. And then put it down. This monster card into here, and then it goes on top, and so on until we've created a single deployment deck with our monsters and our boss randomly distributed throughout. Of course, that one doesn't need a shuffle because it doesn't have a monster or boss card in it. So because we don't know which monsters we're using, we've got the 2 that we're not using over here, which we haven't looked at. We'll keep all of our monsters and their combat decks out here. The last thing we're going to do is take our Power Rangers, put them into the command center, and put out 3 energy tokens. These represent the lives of our Power Rangers. Every time a Power Ranger is defeated, we'll remove one of those energy tokens from the command center. If they're ever all gone, the Power Rangers lose. And that's it. We've set up a 5-player game, and we're ready to start playing. Now, I did note that I would tell you the differences between setup for 5, 4, and 3-player. So if we were only playing with 4 Rangers instead of 5, then we would have 1 extra energy token in the command center, like an extra life, and we would have 2 extra action tokens in the command center. These action tokens are communal and can be used by any of the Rangers at any time, but they're restricted. They can only be used for the action called Recover. If we were playing a 3-player game, then each Ranger would have an additional action token, so they would have 3 each, and we would still keep the 4 energy lives as well. These 3 action tokens can be used by the 3 Rangers for anything that they want. So, we're ready to start the gameplay section of this video. Welcome to Angel Grove, which is under attack by Rita Repulsa and her monsters. It's up to the Power Rangers to defend Angel Grove High in this fully cooperative wave defense game. The game takes roughly about 60 minutes to play, and Over the course of the game, waves of monsters are going to be spawning, and the Power Rangers are going to have to try and defeat them all before they become overwhelmed and panic the town. The Power Rangers can lose if all of the Power Rangers are defeated and they have no energy left in the command center. The Power Rangers can also lose if one of these panic tokens is placed in each of the 4 districts on the board. The minute the 4th panic token is placed in the district, the Power Rangers lose the game immediately. The Power Rangers only win by finishing a combat with Rita Repulsa, the boss of this particular setup, and at the end of the combat, 6 of her cards are in her discard pile. Then she is qualified as defeated, and the Power Rangers have won the game. The game takes place over a series of turns, and each turn is divided into 2 phases. The first is the deployment phase, in which monsters will appear in the town, and the second is the action phase, in which the Power Rangers will move around the town, trying to defeat all of the monsters. We'll start by looking at the deployment phase. Do you remember this monster deployment deck we set up? Well, each of these card backs refers to one of the 4 districts on the board. In the deployment phase, we always resolve 5 cards from this deck. So we start by flipping over the top card, which shows 2 Putty Patrollers. These 2 Putty Patrollers are going to head to Angel Grove High, the top card on the rest of the deck. So we take 2 of these Putty Patroller miniatures and put them here in Angel Grove High. And we resolve the next card. A Super Putty Patroller in the Industrial District. Well, it seems that for some reason all of my Industrial District cards are on the top. And I've just drawn a Super Putty Patroller card, but the district is full. Each district has a maximum capacity of models here on the tile. Once you would place a model into a district that has reached its model capacity, and you're unable to do so, you take a panic token, you put it in that district, and then the model deployment proceeds clockwise. In this case, we had a Super Putty Patroller who would go into the Industrial District, but they couldn't, so they proceed instead to Angel Grove High over here. So as you can see, we've had a lot of Super Putty Patrollers come into the Industrial District, so many that they've managed to panic it, and we've got 3 in Angel Grove High. Now the Power Rangers are going to have to divide up and try and defeat all of these enemies. But with that, we've resolved 5 cards, and so our deployment phase is done. It's time to move on to the action phase. Before we do that, let's look at a few more notes about the deployment phase. If you go to draw a card off of the top of the deployment deck, and the next card is a monster, then you don't know where these guys are supposed to go, which means that you're going to have to reveal this card as well. So now we can see that there's going to be 2 Super Putty Patrollers and Bones, our first monster for this game, appearing in the Industrial District. It should be noted that when a boss or monster comes out accompanied by foot soldiers, you put the foot soldiers down on the board first and the monster or boss afterwards. Unfortunately, our Industrial District is panicked and full, which means that our 2 Super Putty Patrollers and Bones are all going to Angel Grove High. Unfortunately, Angel Grove High has now just reached its figure limit and panicked. Bones will never deploy in an area that's panicked, and he also won't deploy in an area that's reached its figure limit, which means that he moves on to the next district, which is Angel Grove High. Whenever a monster or boss enters a district, that district panics. Now the Power Rangers are in trouble, because 3 out of their 4 districts are panicked. This puts us extremely close, actually, to losing the game. The only way to remove a panic token from a district is to defeat all of the enemy miniatures in that district. So the Power Rangers are going to have to clear out 2 of these complete districts, or Mr. Bones himself. If they don't clear one of these panic tokens, and they draw another monster, they will lose the game, because the monsters will never spawn in a panic district, which means the next monster would spawn here, and create another panic token, immediately ending the game. It is possible, if they fail to kill Bones this round, that additional regular foot soldiers, that is, Super Putty Patrollers and regular Putty Patrollers, will spawn in Angel Grove Park. When a monster does spawn, take their card here and put it next to their combat deck. Then you'll take their combat deck and put it next to the Putty Patrollers and Super Putty Patroller combat decks, because it's now in effect. The reason we remove these cards is that there may come a time when we need to add these cards back into the deck, but we don't want to put the monsters or the boss back into the deck. It should be noted as well that a monster and a boss will always spawn with some foot soldiers accompanying them. However, due to the figure limits and the panic situation, the boss or monster might wind up alone, or with additional soldiers around them. So with that, we've actually explored the deployment phase, and it's time to look at the action phase. So in the action phase, the Power Rangers can spend their action tokens to take actions. Each Power Ranger in a 5-player game has 2. In a 4-player game, they also have 2, but there are some communal action tokens in the command center to take recover actions. And in a 3-player game, each Power Ranger has 3 action tokens. Each Power Ranger will have 2 actions available to them. The Power Rangers can take these actions in any order and can interrupt each other as well. This means that Red Ranger could take 1 action, Yellow Ranger could take 2, the Black Ranger could then take 1 action, and the Blue Ranger could take 2. The action phase continues until all Power Rangers have used all of their actions. There are 3 actions Power Rangers can take in the action phase: move, battle, and recover. I'll explain these in order, but first let me explain just a little bit about how the Power Rangers are dealing with these threats. You see, each Power Ranger has this deck of 10 Power Ranger cards. And these cards are used for combat and they're used for fighting, but they're also the Power Rangers' life force, and they're also used for defense. As soon as this deck of cards runs out, the Ranger's defeated. And they have to move back to the command center and reset. When that happens, you remove one of the energy tokens from the command center. If you would ever go to remove an energy token in the command center and there isn't one, then the Power Rangers have been defeated and they've lost the game. When a Power Ranger moves into the command center, they can perform an automatic reset, which means that they can shuffle their discard pile into their deck and then draw up to 5 cards. If they've spent their energy token, the Power Ranger can also take another energy token. The Power Rangers can also do a recover action, which allows them to take cards out of their discard and shuffle them back into their deck as well. More on that in a bit. Movement is really very simple. A Power Ranger can expend 1 action token at any time and move to anywhere on the board. There are obviously 5 locations available, and that's it. If they enter the command center, they automatically take the power-up, resetting their deck and their energy for free. It's not an action. Once they've taken their 2 actions, then they can't do anything else this round. Because the Power Rangers can take their actions in any order, then you may want to consider your movement very carefully. Once you initiate a combat, a number of Power Rangers in the same district will be able to help each other out and enter that combat. The more Power Rangers that take part in a combat, the more chance they have of succeeding. However, the more of them that take part, the more cards they will use, and thus they will grow ever closer to becoming defeated. Let us say, for the sake of argument, that our Red Ranger moves into Angel Grove High, exhausting an action token, as does our Blue Ranger. The 2 Rangers now decide that they're going to initiate a battle, and Red Ranger decides that he will flip over his last action token to do this. Whichever Ranger initiated the combat will take the Lead Ranger token, and they are the Lead Ranger for that fight. The second action is battle, and it costs an action to initiate one. When you initiate a fight, you'll pick up to 4 miniatures from that district and a monster or boss to fight. So in this case, our Red Ranger and Blue Ranger could fight 2 Putty Patrollers and 2 Super Putty Patrollers, but they couldn't take on this 3rd Super Putty Patroller. If Bones had been in this district, they could fight Bones. It is impossible for 2 monsters or a monster and a boss to be in the same district. Once you've chosen the 4 foot soldiers and monster or boss to fight, then you are ready to begin combat. When combat's initiated, take 2 energies from the common pool and put them here into the shared energy area. Then each Ranger who has fewer than 5 cards in their hand can draw cards until they have 5 cards in their hand. But if they've been damaged already or discarded a lot of cards, they may choose not to do this. It is a tactical consideration. Once each Ranger has decided whether or not they're going to draw cards, then it's time to create the combat sequence. We'll take the combat decks for the appropriate enemies. In this case, we have 2 Super Putty Patrollers and 2 regular Putty Patrollers. Now we create what's called the combat sequence. In this fight, we're fighting 2 Putty Patrollers and 2 Super Putty Patrollers, so we'll draw 4 cards, 2 from each deck. We can choose the order in which we draw these cards, so we'll start with the Putty Patrollers and move up to the Super Putty Patrollers. This is called the combat sequence. Our Power Rangers are fighting all of these cards, but we'll also activate the cards in order from left to right. When all 4 cards have activated, the Power Rangers will have one more turn, and then the combat will end. Whenever a card is defeated, we will remove a matching model. This means we have a sort of like time limit to try and defeat as many of the 4 models as we can. When a card is defeated, it's flipped face down, and a model matching the combat card's type is taken and removed from the district. Any models that are defeated in this manner are placed here on the power board in the next spot along this row. More about this in a minute. Power Rangers can attack any card in the row. Even if they defeat a card later on in the sequence, when that card is activated, it just doesn't do anything. There may be a passive card or a powerful card later on that we might want to prioritize. Note that, of course, you must be mindful of the guard cards when you're choosing the cards you want to attack, because you can't attack a card so long as it's guarded. As we move through the combat sequence, the Power Rangers will move first, then an enemy card will activate and be resolved. The Power Rangers will go again, will activate another enemy card and resolve it, and the Power Rangers again, and so on and so forth until the last card is activated, at which point the Power Rangers have one more turn, and then the combat ends. When the combat is over, any cards, whether they have been defeated or they are undefeated, are shuffled back into their respective decks. Note that because there are 5 models in this district at the start of the fight, the Power Rangers, even if they'd achieved 100% success in the combat, could never have cleared the entire district because there would be one left. They'll have to initiate another combat against this individual if they want to clear the district. If they manage to do so, then the panic token is removed. Clearing a district is the only way to get rid of a panic token. There are 3 key words on the enemy cards. We can see the first example here, guard. Guard means that any of the enemy cards to the left or to the right of this card cannot be attacked until the guard card is killed. Note that in multiple instances of guard cards, guards cannot guard themselves. You can always attack a card with guard on it. The Power Rangers always go first, unless they don't. Some cards have fast on them. Whenever you draw a fast card, it's moved to the front of the combat sequence, and if the front card of the combat sequence has fast on it, then this card is activated before the Power Rangers can activate. If a second fast card is drawn during setup, then it's moved to the front of the queue, and it will be the first card that's activated before the Power Rangers. However, the Power Rangers always have a go after an enemy card is activated. So if this fast card is activated, it would then be the Power Rangers' turn before a second fast card is activated. The card at the front of the combat sequence is always the first card drawn or the last fast card drawn. In this case, though, we didn't draw any fast cards. We were fortunate. This means that our Power Rangers are the first ones to play. The third keyword that you might see on an enemy card is passive. This is a passive effect that always affects the combat, so long as this card is face up in the combat sequence. Fortunately, we didn't draw this card either, so we're okay. The text at the bottom will tell you the effect the card has while it's face up. Our Power Rangers were very fortunate and have managed to defeat all of the putty patrollers, which means that they've managed to fill up their track here on the Megazord board. When this happens, the power level increases, and these models are taken and returned to their common pool. Then we draw the top card of the Zord deck, and we give it to the Power Ranger who owns that Zord. In this case, we'd give Blue Ranger their Zord. The Zord has a special ability that can be used every turn. You can tap it to use its ability at any time, and it refreshes at the end of the turn, right before the enemy deployment phase. If you ever reveal a Zord that belongs to a Ranger who's not in use in the game, then the team can decide who gets it. When the power level reaches 6, that means you've unlocked the Megazord, which is the bottom card of the deck. You can exhaust the Megazord to place the Megazord in any location on the board. Just take the Megazord token and put it down in the district that you want to use it in. Whenever the Rangers initiate a combat in that district, every enemy takes damage at the beginning of the combat. Speaking of which, let's go back to the combat sequence and look at how cards take damage and how the Power Rangers use their cards to defeat enemies. So here are the 4 putty patrollers that our Power Rangers are trying to defeat. They can attack either this guard card here or these 2 super putty patrollers here, because that one's under protection. Our Power Rangers drew up to 5 cards at the beginning of the combat, and these are the cards the Power Ranger can use during the combat. There are 3 kinds of power cards. You've got attack cards, reaction cards, and maneuver cards, and each one works slightly differently. Now there are a few things to note about these cards. First, the name of the card is at the top, obviously. This here is the price in energy that you'll have to pay to use the card. These are the energy tokens here. When a Power Ranger spends energy, they're just returned to the common pool. These are the number of attack dice the Power Ranger will get when they attack with the card. And this is any additional information about the attack that takes place. Furthermore, down here we've got the defensive value on the card. More on that when we get to enemy attacks. Energy comes from 2 sources. Remember, our 2 Power Rangers came into battle with an energy token that they were given during setup. You can also get these energy tokens by powering up at Command Center or by performing a recovery action. These energy tokens are completely interchangeable, which means you can give your energy token to anyone else. So if Red wanted to use his 3-cost Power Sword attack, he could spend Blue's energy token, so long as Blue was cool with it. At the beginning of the game, we also put 2 energy tokens here into the communal pool. Red is free to spend these as well, provided everyone agrees that it's a good idea. It's always good to cooperate and get everyone's consent. In a situation where you are in big trouble because you've got no cards left or no energy left, you can always exhaust any action tokens that are still active to add 2 energy to the communal energy pool. This might help you get out of a really tough fix, but it's not the most efficient way to gain energy. If you want to defeat enemies, you'll need to use attack cards. So if Red spends 3 energy to use the Power Sword attack, Red will then declare a target of the attack. In this case, the guard card at the front of the queue. Then they'll roll the 5 combat dice, and they're looking for these damage symbols here. Now in this case, Red's got 5 damage. 5 damage is dealt to the card. The card only has a health of 3, so it is defeated. It should be noted that the excess damage is lost. The card is flipped face down, but remains in the queue. These here are misses. Each die has 3 hits, 2 misses, and a double hit. The Power Sword says the next time any Ranger performs an attack during this battle, add 2 dice to that attack. And this could be the Red Ranger or any other Ranger. But this card is spent, so now it's put in the Red Ranger's discard pool. Now that the Power Rangers have had their first go, it's time to resolve the enemy card. However, because it's been deactivated, nothing happens, and it's time for the Rangers to play again. Red blew all his energy, so now he's going to have to play a maneuver card. Maneuver cards are typically support cards or buffs that help out the Rangers. It's a 0-cost card, which means it doesn't cost any energy to play. And you gain 1 energy from playing it. And then it says another Ranger of your choice may immediately play a card. So we'll take 1 energy and we'll put it in the communal pool. Red will then discard this card. The only other Ranger in the fight is Blue, so Red picks Blue to play a card. Blue decides to play his Mighty Maces for 1 energy. Blue selects to attack the next card in the path, and Blue's going to gain 5 dice to do it, because he gets 2 bonus dice from the residual effect of the Power Sword. Remember, the Power Sword affects the next attack played, and that refers specifically to attack cards. Blue has rolled his 5-die attack, but unfortunately he's only got 1 damage against the Health 2 card, which sucks. Blue takes a damage token and puts it down on the card to show the card's taken 1 damage. But the Power Ranger turn is over, and it's time for this card to be activated. Now this is a standard enemy attack that does 3 damage. And when an enemy attack hits for damage, one of the Power Rangers is going to have to take it. We will rotate the card to show that it's been activated, and someone's going to have to do defense. The Blue Ranger feels like his attack was really bad and feels partially responsible, so he decides to defend against the 3 damage. So we'll reveal cards from the Blue Ranger's deck to try and block the damage. So in this case we've revealed Tactical Strike. This has 2 shields on it, so it blocks 2 damage. However, we've taken 3, so we discard this card to the Blue Ranger's discard pile and reveal another one. Now, the remaining damage is 1, and this card has 3 shields on it, which is 2 greater. That means that this card is placed back on the bottom of the Blue Ranger's deck, and they've successfully repelled the damage, losing only 1 card to the discard. It should be noted that this star here means that this has a special defense ability, and if we check the card, it says when this is revealed for defense, gain an energy. So that's cool. We've actually managed to gain an energy into the shared pool thanks to the Blue Ranger. Note that Power Rangers can only ever have one energy on them at a time, and any energy gained during the combat is always placed in the shared pool. This card goes back on the bottom of the deck, and the deck is returned now that the defense has been resolved. Note that a defense card is only placed on the bottom of the deck if its shields exceed the value of the damage that's been dealt. So in this case, 3 was greater than the 1 damage remaining, so it was placed on the bottom. However, if we'd drawn the Mighty Mace's card first, we would have been able to repel all of the damage with it, but because it's equal to the damage that was dealt, it is discarded. We would still gain the energy from the special ability. In this situation, the Blue Ranger has most of their cards in their discard pile in hand, and only 2 cards left in their deck. And they take a 3 damage attack. We reveal the top card of the deck, which is a tactical strike that defends against 2 damage. The next card is a Knowledge's Power card that also defends against 2 damage, which exceeds the 1 damage remaining after we defended with the tactical strike. There's no cards left in the Blue Ranger's deck, but because we are instructed to put this one back on the bottom, it actually goes onto the bottom of the deck before the Ranger is defeated, meaning that the Blue Ranger has hung in there just barely. If a Ranger is ever defeated during the combat, that Ranger is warped back to the command center, and they perform a power-up, resetting their deck by shuffling the discard pile into it, drawing up to 5 cards, and replacing their energy. Any Ranger left then has to complete the fight on their own. If all of the Rangers are defeated before the combat sequence is complete, skip straight to the cleanup, shuffling the cards back into their respective decks. During combat, sometimes an enemy's card will drain the Ranger's energy. When an energy is drained, the Rangers can give it up from the shared pool or their personal supplies. However, if there's not enough energy to cover the energy being drained, then someone's going to have to discard cards equal to the amount of energy the Rangers can't pay. So, you want to be careful that you don't run out of energy in combat, especially when there's a drain card somewhere in the combat sequence. If the Rangers ever run out of combat cards or energy, and they can't play any more cards or use any more abilities, then they're in real trouble. You just activate the rest of the queue and then proceed with cleanup. Once the entire combat sequence has been processed, we go to cleanup. Any damage left over on the cards is returned to the communal damage pool. The cards, of course, go back into their respective decks, which are shuffled. And the last thing is that any excess energy here in the shared energy pool is lost. But before it's lost, any surviving Rangers can take 1 energy to store on their Ranger. The remaining energy is returned to the communal pool. Now that we understand how combat works, let's just have a quick look at how a combat with a monster works. In this example, Blue Ranger and Red Ranger have shown up to take on Bones, a Putty Patroller, and a Super Putty Patroller. We're going to build the combat sequence as normal, but we're going to start with Bones cards. And Bones is a monster, and he always deals up 4 cards. Then we've got 1 Putty Patroller. And remember, you can draw these 2 cards in any order that you want. And that goes below Bones' front card here like this. And we've got 1 Super Putty Patroller as well. Now, as you can see here, we've got a slightly more elaborate combat sequence, but it's actually executed in much the same way. We're going to go from left to right along the boss cards, and then we'll go from left to right along the bottom row of cards. There should be a few distinct things that are noted here, though. The first is that any guard cards on the top or the bottom also guard cards that are orthogonally adjacent. This means that our Cannon Fodder card here is guarding both Putty Pummel and Gravedigger Slash. Similarly, Skeleton Zord here is guarding Gravedigger Slash, Eye Lasers, and Putty Pummel. If we defeat Cannon Fodder, that doesn't really help us because both cards are still guarded by Skeleton Zord. So we need to defeat them both before we can attack either of these 2 cards. When we do manage to defeat one of the boss's cards, and it's flipped face down like this, then we've effectively taken a life off from the boss. During the cleanup phase, any defeated boss cards are put into a discard pile face up next to their deck. Once we've completed cleanup, check their discard pile and count the number of cards in it. If the number of cards is 4, the boss is defeated, and they're removed from the board. However, if there are fewer than 4 cards, this means the monster is still alive, and we'll have to initiate another combat to try and make the total up to 4. This means that it is possible to kill a monster in 1 round of combat, but it's extremely difficult. When a monster is defeated and removed from the board, If there are any foot soldiers in that district remaining, they flee the battle because they're scared that their boss was defeated. However, if they weren't defeated in the combat sequence, then they don't go on the power board, they're just returned to the regular supply. You have to defeat them if you want to level up your Zords. Once the combat sequence has been completely resolved, any monster cards that were not defeated are shuffled back into their deck. The defeated cards, of course, go face up into the discard pile. It should be noted that bosses are tougher than monsters. Bosses still only have 4 cards. If you want to defeat a boss, you're going to need to defeat 6 cards instead of 4, making them tougher than monsters. This also means that you can't actually completely defeat a boss in a single combat. You'll have to initiate at least 2. So now that we've been over combat, let's just talk about recover really quickly. The best way, of course, to regenerate your ranger is to move back to the command center and then do a free power-up. However, sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes you've got to recover while you're out in the world fighting monsters. A recover action allows you to go into your discard and recover up to 6 shields worth of cards and shuffle them back into your deck. And you also gain a power onto your ranger if you didn't have one. Note that each ranger can only ever hold a maximum of 1 power. In this case, our blue ranger has decided to do a recover action, so he goes into his discard pile. He has a total of 8 shields worth of cards in here. He really likes the mighty maces, so he decides to take that, and then he decides to take these 2 cards here because he needs some extra life. This tactical strike is left in his discard, and his deck is shuffled now. Unfortunately, Billy already has 1 energy token, so he can't gain another. Once all Power Rangers have expended all of their actions, then it's time to reset those Zords if you've unlocked any Zord cards, and back to the deployment of the monsters in the next round. And that's pretty much everything you need to know to get through Power Rangers. The vast majority of the game is spent negotiating these tricky combat sequences with clever card play, and deciding which Rangers are going to team up to clear which districts. Just remember that you can't get rid of a panic token until you defeat all the monsters in that district, and that the game will end the minute the 4th panic token comes out, so you have to be really careful. And so now you should be ready to get going with your own game of Power Rangers, 3 to 5 players. I'll just talk quickly about the game variants and the 2-player rules before I go, but I hope that you've enjoyed this video and found it helpful. There are 2 game variants. The first involves giving these locations specific location special rules, and the second involves flipping over the command center to what's called Assault Mode. These 2 variants can be used together or separately. When you flip over a district to its other side, you'll see that it now has this text above it that explains a special rule for the district. In this case, for Angel Grove Park, it says, at the end of each round, move 1 soldier from this location to the next location clockwise, which is not panicked. So this is, of course, bad for the Rangers because the enemies are spreading out and they're moving around, creating more panic. Not all locations are bad for the Rangers, though. Some of them have really useful effects, like Ernie's Juice Bar, which says when a Ranger in this location performs the recover action, they may recover cards up to a total of 9 shields instead of 6. If you're playing with the command center on Assault Mode, if a foot soldier tries to spawn into a district that's full, instead of moving along to the next empty district, they'll instead spawn into the command center. Any monsters or bosses that spawn will also spawn directly into the command center. If there's any monsters or enemies in the command center at the end of a turn, the Power Rangers lose. So this makes it significantly more difficult. Furthermore, the Power Rangers can't take the free power-up action so long as there are enemies in the command center. The 2-player version of the game is a little more complicated. Each player will control 2 Rangers. In this case, they'll take 2 Ranger models, they'll take the power decks for both of those Rangers, and shuffle them together to create one single 20-card deck. Each Ranger that the player controls will move around the board together and act almost like a single unit in tandem. Now it should be noted that I mentioned in setup you can draw up to 5 cards, and at the beginning of each combat you can draw up to 5 cards, but if you're playing the 2-player game, then it's 7 cards. You may draw up to 7 cards. It should also be noted that as they're moving together, they can still each hold 1 energy, which means you can have a total of 1 energy per Ranger. I mentioned in combat, at the beginning of the combat, you'll take 2 energy and put them into the communal pool, but in a 2-player game, it's actually 3 energy that you get. Any cards like this that deal damage will target a single Ranger, but Obviously the damage will be dealt with by the communal deck of both Rangers. Some cards deal damage to different Rangers. In this case, both Rangers controlled by a player would be counted separately, so this would deal 6 damage to the Blue Ranger Red Ranger team. Some cards, like Red Ranger's maneuver card here, allow you to target another Ranger other than the Red Ranger. The Red Ranger could play this card from his hand and specifically target the Blue Ranger on his team. Then the player could play one of the Blue Ranger cards from their hand as well. And with that, I think we're pretty much done covering Power Rangers Heroes of the Grid. I hope you found this video helpful and that it's got you ready to play your own games of Power Rangers at home. And I wish you luck against the forces of Rita, or Master Vile. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow.